Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar today. We are so excited to have Carter Morgan here with us and just so thankful that you all have joined us to talk about new age strategies to get into software development. So thank you all so much. If you feel comfortable dropping in the chat where you're joining us from, I think it's always fun to see the different just time zones and locations that are represented. So I am joining from South Georgia. Would love to know where you all are joining in from. So with that, I will just give you a little bit of background on High Counselor. So we are a career accelerator that helps job seekers land their dream job through a 4-week training period that will cover important topics and concepts that are typically asked during those interviews. And so the training covers behavioral, HR, and technical interviews, and we will also optimize your resume, your LinkedIn profile. You're going to have the opportunity to attend sessions on networking and salary negotiation. So a lot of really good information that we can provide to you. Our instructors and those one-on-one mock sessions and tools are really just going to help you simplify the networking process and the job search in general. And we really just want to make sure that you feel confident and comfortable when it comes to those interviews and doing that networking. That can always be scary to put yourself out there. So just making sure that you feel confident and comfortable moving forward with your job search process. We have automated email networking for candidates. We also are able to provide direct referrals to the different companies that are in our network. And all of these resources are available to you, as well as our auto job application tool, which is a really neat feature, just kind of taking the burden off of applying to all of those positions that you're finding and applying to. And then finally, one of the most unique services that High Counselor has to offer are those real world projects. So definitely check out those projects. We conduct them on LinkedIn Live, specifically for data science and software development job seekers. And so you are always welcome to join in on those live projects, really to just enhance your resume and impress recruiters. I'm going to provide you all with some links at the end of the session. And one of those will be that live project link. So definitely check that out. Also, just so you all know, we are currently supporting candidates that are interested in software engineering, data science, and sales related roles. And I know that this was just a really quick overview of High Counselor, but if you were interested in learning more, we host info sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So that means that we have a session tomorrow night. So would love to see you there. You can sign up for the info session or see the recording of a previous info session at our website at highcounselor.com. Our next cohort start date is June 26th, so feel free to get those applications in for that upcoming cohort or join one of the info sessions for more information. And take a look at our LinkedIn page as well as the High Counselor website to just keep up to date with those live projects, any events that we have going on, and then obviously upcoming cohorts. But now the reason why you all are here is to hear from Carter. So Carter is a software development engineer at Amazon Web Services. Prior to joining Amazon, he worked as a senior software engineer at Grubhub and gained over 3 years of experience at Disney Parks, Experiences, and Products. During his tenure, Carter successfully developed and managed over 40 reusable web components using the Angular and Polymer frameworks. He also played a key role in deploying cloud-based web services, conducted interviews, provided mentorship, and contributed to project direction. Carter holds a bachelor's degree in science from Brigham Young University. We are so excited to have you here, Carter. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And so I will pop back in with a Q&A session. So everyone, just keep in mind any questions that you might have. Feel free to drop them in the comment section. as we progress through the presentation, and we will make sure that we get all those questions answered. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Carter. So thank you.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, like I said, I'm Carter Morgan. Kenzie already gave me a quick little background, and we'll touch a bit more on that in just a second. Thanks for joining us all here at High Counselor. I'm an instructor here at High Counselor. One of my favorite things about High Counselor is the access you get to real professional software engineers, many of whom are working at companies or have worked at companies that you're probably very interested in working at one day, right? So I conduct live sessions with our High Counselor students, and one thing I always tell them is one of the big benefits of High Counselor is that live instruction, the real feedback, the real-time networking with professional software engineers. And that applies to this live stream today. We're going to have time for Q&A, but also if you have any questions throughout any of this, please drop it in the chat. I'm more than happy, I might derail the presentation for a bit to answer your question specifically. If it's a good one, it might provide good feedback to everyone listening here today. So please engage with this. It's not a video, it's real life. We're live here. So please engage as you would if we were in person together. Let's do the next slide. Okay, next slide. So this is a bit about me. So as was mentioned before, I have a bachelor's degree from Brigham Young University. I'm actually located in Utah currently. Big fan of BYU, go Cougs. And I'm currently pursuing my master's of computer science from Georgia Tech. And that's been a wonderful program. I've been happy to be a part of that. Next slide. So experience. Yeah, I've had the privilege of working for some companies you've probably heard of. Currently work for AWS, Amazon Web Services. I have been employed there for a little over a year at this point. I work on a component called Private Link, which facilitates secure communication between a virtual private cloud and Amazon Web Services, which is really cool because you might have an application that could really benefit from using, like, say, DynamoDB, right? But your security requirements might say that your virtual private cloud cannot interface with the public internet. Well, our application makes it so like all of DynamoDB lives in your virtual private cloud. We route all of your traffic through Amazon's private networks. And so it really simplifies security for some, for a lot of our customers. And that's one of the cool things about working at AWS is we have some really, really big customers. I've been, paged in on issues. We had Disney call last week. That was funny, working with my former employer. When Warner Brothers relaunched HBO Max, we had to help them out. The New York Times called at one point, right? So that's one thing I love about working at AWS is the scale of kind of what we're dealing with. We get to work with some of these really big, really cool companies. And as was mentioned before I worked at AWS, I worked at Grubhub. I was a senior software engineer there, doing some full stack development for what was called the post-purchase experience team. So you can kind of imagine after you submit an order, we handled everything after that. So that's like order tracking, order cancellations, things like that. And then when I was at Disney, I worked on sort of the core services team, right? And so we managed a lot of different, we tried to own any part of the application experience that we didn't want duplicated across teams. So you can imagine like authentication. We made like a lot of modules for like authentication, or like we created a lot of like Disney standard components like drop-down menus and buttons and calendars and things like that, right? And I was fortunate at Disney, our department was actually part of what's called Imagineering, which is, those are the guys who make the rides. And so I got to meet some really, really cool people there. And obviously it goes without saying, the advice you're getting today comes from Carter Morgan, professional software engineer, just an individual, is in no way sanctioned by any of these companies. So this is just my advice as a professional software engineer. Let's move on to the next slide. So the theme of the presentation today is it's pretty simple. It's just 10 things I wish I'd known when I started out, right? You guys are already ahead of me in that you're seeking out information, right? I had no idea I wanted to be a software engineer when I was younger, right? Honestly, Disney was my first job out of college. And if you had told me when I was younger that I would work for Disney one day, I honestly would have guessed that I was running the churro cart before I would have guessed that I was a software engineer. And so it kind of came as a surprise to me. I've been fortunate to accumulate mentors along the way, but at the beginning I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And so these are just sort of 10 things I wish I had known at the beginning, and that I picked up on my years in my career. So let's move on to the next slide. Great. So the first thing, and this kind of goes without saying, software engineering, it's really cool and it's also really hard, right? And I just want to say for anyone listening to this presentation, maybe a lot of you are starting out your careers, maybe some of you are in the middle of your careers, right? But I think this advice is applicable for everyone, because even I have to remember this sometimes, right? Which is that if you're starting down this path of becoming a software engineer or a data engineer, right? You've selected a really, really cool profession, right? That was actually kind of what got me started. I thought I wanted to go into like business management or something like that. And I had to take a Microsoft Excel class, right? And if you never used Microsoft Excel, you can put the different formulas in the cells. And I had to use the if formula. And I thought it was fascinating that if you put a value in one cell, that the value in one cell could be determined by the value of a different cell, right? Just by a simple if statement. And that was so interesting and cool to me that I decided to pivot and start pursuing software engineering professionally. And I knew it was what I wanted to do because it was the only homework in my life that I ever looked forward to doing. Not all of it, right? But that feeling of writing code and then seeing the thing you wrote come to life on the screen, that was like unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And the good news is, as you go throughout your career, there's going to be parts of your career that are mundane or boring or things like that. But that general magic of creating something and shipping it, right? That really never wears off and is a very, very cool thing to do. And the other half of that, it's really, really hard, right? People always say, well, is the software engineering field going to become saturated? And I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know, right? And some fields are maybe more saturated than they were 10 years ago or something like that. But I believe that this field has just already a pretty authentic moat that makes it so that it's less prone to saturation than maybe some other fields, which is just that it's really, really hard, right? I've seen very smart, very intelligent people struggle with software engineering, right? And especially as you go on in your career and it gets more complicated, right? I've been privileged to work at some good companies and everyone I've worked with is incredibly smart and incredibly intelligent, right? Because that's what the field requires. And so, if you're starting your career in the middle of your career or you feel like it's really hard, join the club, right? We all feel that way, right? I've met one or two just natural prodigies, right? But even then, it gets hard for them too, because if you are a prodigy, you should be pushing yourself. And they often do push themselves to the point where it's hard again, right? And so just know that if you feel like you're struggling, there's nothing wrong. You're doing exactly what you should. And it's just because you've chose a really cool but really hard field. So let's move on to point number 2. Okay. And that kind of leans into to point number 2, which is knowing more will make you a better engineer, right? I think there are some, not just engineers, but people in life, right, who are always trying to ask, what's the least I can get away with, right? What's the least amount of work I can do, right? And that really, in this field, only hurts yourself. And we're actually very fortunate to be in that position, right? Because there are a lot of fields where you can have sort of a thankless job, right? I think I used to work for Pizza Hut, right? And I was a delivery driver, and I also helped prep the pizzas, right? And no matter how many pizzas I prepped, and if I prepped them as fast as I possibly could, I didn't really see anything from that, right? I might have felt good about myself at the end of the day, but I didn't really get any money. It's not like there was a lot of room for promotion or anything at the local Pizza Hut, right? And so you start to think to yourself, maybe I should just put the bare minimum in, just enough to sort of call it a day. And that's not a great place to be. But the unfortunate reality is there are a lot of jobs where that's kind of the smart position, is to kind of give as little of yourself as you can. We're fortunate that that's not the case being a software engineer, right? Which is, I'm not saying slave over your job, work 80 hours a week or anything like that, but I'm saying really strive to produce good code, strive to produce a good product, right? Strive to learn more, to know more, to understand more about not just your technical domain, but your business domain, right? Because as you do that, you're going to become a better engineer, right? And the more valuable an engineer you become, right? Not only is that going to lead to more opportunities at your company, but that means that when you move on to another company, you're going to be able to get higher positions, you're going to be able to get better money. And so I really highly recommend just taking ownership and pride of your career, of your knowledge, and striving to be the best engineer you can by knowing as much about our field as you can, because it will pay off. It will absolutely pay dividends. Let's move on to point number 3. Number 3 is that soft skills in this field really, really matter. Now, I know a lot of us who sign up for this field maybe don't have the best soft skills. And so I'm not saying that you're screwed or anything like that, but I am saying that focusing on your soft skills will really improve your career as an engineer. I think something that a lot of people either misunderstand or forget about this field is it's collaborative in nature. Think about any piece of software you use in your day-to-day life. Think about Google Maps, for example, right? Can you imagine how many software engineers it takes to maintain that? It's maybe 100,000, I don't know, right? And not only are the software engineers needed to maintain it, but then you have to have, you have product managers and designers and managers and salespeople and all these, different positions. I mean, that is a big organization, right? And so the idea that the people who work on Google Maps just sit in their office, at home by themselves coding, it's not really true, right? You need to be able to collaborate effectively. You need to be able to explain maybe the issues you're running into. You need to be able to explain why the path you want to take is the right path. You might need to explain why the path that someone else wants to take is the wrong path, right? You're going to have to work with people day in, day out. You're going to need people who are going to review your pull requests, right? People who are going to help you if you get stuck, things like that. You don't think soft skills matters there, right? You don't think it helps that if you say to if you're interested in someone's family or their kids or their hobbies or things like that, that they might be more inclined to help you out? I'm not promoting the idea of soft skills is purely utilitarian like that. But I have found in my career that just being nice and pleasant and relatively easy to work with goes so far. And it goes way further than being like the savant coder, right? Like I think there's like that trope of the guy who's just a real big jerk, but he's so brilliant. And I'll tell you, I don't see that so often, right? I can think of a couple people that are like that, but I can tell you this much. 1, I meet a lot more jerks who also aren't very good at their job. And 2, the jerks I meet who are really, really good coders would be better coders if they weren't a jerk, right? And they would be better at communicating their vision. They'd be better at getting things done. And so, don't think of this as a place where soft skills don't matter. They really, really do. And so if you already have some good soft skills, leverage those, right? Because it's absolutely going to propel your career. And if you're someone who's maybe a little self-confident in your soft skills, start thinking about how you could improve those, how you might actively work on improving them, because soft skills are a skill. They can be practiced, they can be worked on, and it will pay off in your career. Let's move on. All right, networking isn't just Wi-Fi. That's a very bad pun. But the idea is that in your career, the more people you know, the easier your career goes on, right? That's one reason I really like High Counselor, because you already start off with a bit of a network, right? With your cohorts, with your instructors. With every live session I teach, I always end it with an invitation to connect with me on LinkedIn. Most students usually take me up on it, right? So you got to be thinking about how you can build your network, right? And there are lots of ways to build your network, right? There's networking events, kind of like what you're doing right now. There is sort of meetups. You contribute to open source projects, but by far the strongest way to improve your network is just to be a good coworker and a good employee, right? And then the people you work with will, because you'll all move on to different jobs eventually, but they'll recommend you for jobs and you'll recommend them for jobs, right? And so, you want to be really careful about burning bridges, and just always be thinking with your coworkers that these could be potential very valuable connections one day, right? Which doesn't mean we strip away the humanity of our coworkers and think of them just as a means of connection, right? But that's, again, what I kind of like about all of this is, like, you'd be surprised how much career advice just boils down to be kind, be pleasant, be nice to others, right? And I've seen some people who are real cutthroat in business and in programming, things like that. It works out for some of them. It does. It doesn't. But all those same people, I think it would just work out better if they were just nicer. And so that's just, when you're working with your coworkers and really anyone you come across with, always think to yourself, how can I be the sort of person that they would want to refer in the future, right? How can I be the sort of person that they would like to work with again? I always say a decent chunk of any job interview is the person thinking, can I stand working with this person for 40 hours a week, right? And so that's a big part of building your career, is just growing that network. Let's move on. Great. Number 5 is that job interviews are a two-way street. This is something that people forget often, right? Oftentimes they'll go to a job interview and they're just so desperate to get the job, right? That they are saying or doing whatever it takes to get the job, right? And I'm not gonna, some people are in different situations. Some people just really need a job ASAP because they got a family to feed. I'm not casting judgment on anything like that. But for a lot of us, we can afford to be a little more selective in the jobs we choose. And so when you're interviewing, right, it's not just them interviewing you to see if you would be a good fit. You are interviewing them to see if they would be a good fit, right? So I always, and I can tell when I'm conducting interviews, whenever I can tell that the candidate is interviewing me to see if I'm a good fit, it honestly makes me respect the candidate more, because I think this is someone who values their time. This is someone who knows what they're worth. And this is someone who is discerning enough to try to figure out if this is a good organization, right? And I know if they're looking for good organizations, that when they join our good organization, one of the very first things on their mind is going to be, well, how do I make this a better organization? Or how do I help continue to keep it a good organization, right? And so, for me, one of the biggest I won't say one of the biggest red flags, but it always raises a little alarm bell in my head, is when I ask the candidate at the end of the interview and say, how many, or I say, do you have any questions for us? And they say no. And I'm kind of like, really? You're that incurious about the place that you might spend 40 hours a week working? You don't have any questions for us? So I always encourage candidates, prospective candidates, to ask questions, right? And so some good questions are, what do you like most about your job, right? If you're feeling particularly confident, one I've asked in the past is, why would someone not want to work here? Because that always brings up some interesting answers. I always like to ask, what does a typical day look like in your job? One time, this was before COVID and remote work became a lot prominent, I said, like, what's the layout of the office? Like, is it like an open plan or things like that? And so, you're not making your decision solely based on that, but just trying to get an idea of what the company looks like and how things work. Other good questions are, what are the opportunities for internal promotion? How are conflicts handled between employees? Things like that. These are all great questions that can help you figure out if this is a good place to work, because you should be, have a high opinion of yourself, right? Don't be so concerned and just so grateful that anyone would give you a job, right? If you're a smart, talented guy or gal, they'll be lucky to have you. And so you act like it, right? And really do all you can, not to be cocky and not to be arrogant or things like that, but just to be thoughtful and careful and curious about the place you're going to be working at. So that takes us about halfway through. Let's talk about we'll stay at point number 5. I just like to give everyone a minute or two to how about you want to take it over?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll just jump back in. That was awesome. Thank you for those first 5 points. And Carter, I will say too that if I had a job at Disney, I too would probably want to man the churro cart. I think that is where I would thrive. But no, that was great. So just gonna give everyone a minute to kind of process everything that was shared. And if you'll have any questions midway through for Carter, I'm sure that there are probably a few things that are off limits. So go ahead and share in those comments.
Please do. I try to be as open as possible. I'm happy to answer whatever questions anyone might have.
I did see that someone asked if there is a recording of the presentation to come back to later. It will stay on our YouTube and LinkedIn accounts, so always feel free to rewatch if you so choose.
Great. I'm just thinking about Disney. I'm living the remote life now, working for Amazon remotely and enjoying that. And who knows, I might go back to an office one day. I haven't made any decisions, but what I always tell people right now is when I worked my office job at Disney, our office building was in the theme park. I worked at Disney World, and if anyone's ever been to Disney World, it's Hollywood Studios. They had an old animation unit out there. They had an animation studio.
Wow.
That used to make parts of the movies out there. They animated like Beauty and the Beast, or parts of Beauty and the Beast and the Lion King and things out there. Anyhow, and so on our lunch breaks, we would literally go and ride the rides. And like my job was to mentor the interns, but I didn't have an office. And so when I wanted to like have a conversation with them, I'd just be like, hey, let's like go ride the Tower of Terror. And we would just chat on the line. And so I always tell people when they're trying to get back into an office, I say, if you can give me an office as cool as that one, I will go back into the office. But for me right
now. How fun.
Yeah. So great play. I really enjoy my time with Disney.
No, that's amazing. But it would be hard to beat the churro cart. Maybe Dole Whip if I could.
Yeah.
Good.
It looks like we have a question.
Yeah.
So
how can we show that we are
Amazonians? Yes, if you're interested in working at Amazon, that's a great question, right? So let's talk a bit about Amazon, right? And again, I have to give the disclaimer: this is not official Amazon advice. This is one guy who got hired at Amazon. It could be different in your experience, right? So Amazon really lives or dies by its leadership principles, right? If you just Google Amazon leadership principles, you can find all of them. I believe there are 14, right? So they live or die by those leadership principles. And so when you are doing your interviews with Amazon, typically how we break down our interviews is we'll do half of it is devoted to leadership principle questions. The other half is devoted to technical questions, right? And we evaluate both about equally, right? That's something people often forget. I would really look at those leadership principles that Amazon has. And what I encourage all candidates when they're anywhere they're interviewing, but particularly at a place like Amazon that has really well-defined leadership principles, is look at all of them and come up with about 2 stories per leadership principle of something in your career, right? You look and say, like, for example, one of the leadership principles is learn and be curious. We talked a bit about that earlier, right? So I would try to think of what are 2 times in your career where you were learning and being curious, and how did it benefit the project you were working on? And this can include school, right? If you're not out of school yet. And I come up with 2 stories there, right? I was fortunate when I interviewed at Amazon that my recruiter let me know which leadership principles we'd be focusing on in each interview. And so I knew that I only had to target about 8 of the leadership principles. But that's what I did is I wrote 2 stories and I wrote them all out in narrative form, in that STAR pattern, the situation, task, action, result. And then I would just have them prepped and ready to go. And I was thinking, when I interviewed, I asked, can I have notes? And they said, absolutely. And so I had some notes on my desk with me with my stories. I didn't read them off a piece of paper, but I just sort of kept them there ready to go. And one thing that was really cool about having all those stories prepared, right, is they would often ask me throughout the interview, I could tell that they were asking a question about ownership, right? And not learn and be curious, but I would actually use the learn and be curious story I had prepared, because I would realize, I'd say, oh, actually this applies to ownership, right? And so I would use that story. So as far as showing that you're an Amazonian, really, really study those leadership principles. Think about the times in your career you've used them, prepare stories for them, and then just be prepared to talk about them in a convincing way, right? All interviews are a bit of a sales job. And I was fortunate at college. I actually did sell stuff. I sold football tickets. Not all of us have been there, but you got to sell yourself just a little bit.
Great. That kind of goes along with another question that was asked by Chris. So how can we demonstrate that we understand the core services?
The core services. So yes.
Or like core values, maybe. Yeah.
Or are we talking, Chris, feel free to put a clarification. Are you talking about the core Amazon services like DynamoDB and S3 and Lambda and things like that? I'm going to assume that's what you're talking about. Please put in the chat if I went incorrectly, and I'll pivot. But if you're asking how can you demonstrate that you understand the core services, there's sort of two routes I'd recommend. One, if you are already a professional software engineer, find opportunities in your job to interact with those core services, right? Because nothing really beats using them. Yes, Chris says we are talking about that. Good, you guessed right. So yeah, if you have any opportunity in your job to interact with like DynamoDB or S3 or Lambda or Kinesis or anything like that, seek out those opportunities and use them. If you can also take, AWS offers some sort of learning certificate. I just Google like AWS Cloud certificate or something like that. AWS offers a real deal course, and I believe it's free, to become certified in those services, right? And so that is a really, really great way to signal to future employers that you understand that. That's one of the things I always tell people in life. I am a dad. I'm a young dad. I have 3 kids with a 4th on the way. I'm doing a master's degree. I work at AWS. I always say there are more hours in a day than you'd think, right? And so it's not for everyone, right? But if you really want to, you'd be surprised that if you wanted to get that AWS certificate, right? If you dedicated 1 hour less of Netflix or PlayStation or whatever to studying, you'd be surprised how far that'll take you. So that's if you want to demonstrate sort of technical prowess with AWS services. And that can be great for all sorts of jobs, and that'll certainly help you stand out at AWS. But here's the little secret. If you want to get a job at AWS in particular, we don't care. I had no idea that Private Link existed before I joined Amazon, right? Even one of the jobs I was in before was in Azure, not AWS, right? And honestly, at AWS, I did not know what language I would be programming in until I showed up my first day. No one ever asked. No one cared. At Amazon, we are interested in hiring good engineers, right? And good engineers recognize that the language, the service, anything like that, that's just a tool. And different jobs require different tools, right? And so we do a lot of stuff in Java. We do a lot of stuff in Python. We do some stuff in Go and Rust and Ruby and things like that. I'd never used Ruby before joining AWS, but I know it now. I don't know it very well, but I know enough. And so that's at Amazon, we are looking for just all around good engineers and good problem solvers. And so it's always great to be familiar with AWS's services. These are powerful, powerful products, but it's not a requirement to getting hired at Amazon. I legitimately think we would hire someone who had said, what's AWS, right? Like, I have no idea what that is. If they proved that they had operated according to leadership principles and had good technical skills, I legitimately, honestly believe we would hire someone who had never heard of AWS, which is good. That's a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you. We have a question about really just asking for any specifications or suggestions for ML jobs.
I wish I could speak more to that. I don't know a ton about that. That is also one of the things I'm interested in my master's degree right now. I'm taking some more foundational courses, but I'm hoping to take some machine learning and AI courses in the future. I can pontificate and give you a lot of advice, but it's not going to be better than the average person. So I'm not going to touch on it too much, but it's a great question. I don't know. If you find out, connect with me on LinkedIn and we can talk about it.
Great. Okay, moving on to our next question. We have a viewer who was wondering if you could talk a bit about building a portfolio for software engineering positions, and if you would recommend creating a website showcasing other interests instead of purely concentrating on GitHub.
So my advice, right, is that most people are not going to look at your portfolio, which does not mean to not have one, right? But I think some people really are like, oh, I'm going to make this really slick, really cool looking website, right? But a lot of getting hired, especially your first job, is a numbers game, right? You send out 500 resumes. You hope that 50 get read. You hope that of those 50, 10 give you an interview. And you hope that of those 10 interviews, 1 gives you a job. I always tell people, right, like, I really wanted to work at Disney. That was like my dream company. I was really excited to join there. I applied to 50 internships at Disney when I was in college. I got an interview for one of them, and I was the second choice. And the first guy turned it down. So that is my origin story as far as my career goes, right? And so you can look at me and say, oh, this guy's worked at Disney and Grubhub and AWS and things like that. A lot of it is just that having that one lucky break. And honestly, my even luckier break is that, like I said, I didn't even know I wanted to do software engineering. I applied at my university, has a big nonprofit attached to it for training. It's a religious university. It trains missionaries that go out into the world, and those missionaries have to learn different languages. I was one myself. I learned Portuguese, and so that we developed apps for those missionaries to learn those new languages, right? And so that was my very first ever programming job in college. But I didn't even apply to it. I thought I was just looking for a job. I had a minor interest in programming, right? I applied to be QA, quality assurance, on the apps. I got turned down for that job. But the guy liked me and said, we might be a good fit for a programmer. And he just sent my resume to that department. They called me, right? I mean, I don't even remember who that guy is. And I owe my entire career to him. Because that first job is what got me the Disney internship, and the Disney internship got me full-time, and yada, yada, yada. Right? And so there's a decent amount of luck and just good fortune, and you want to be prepared when that good fortune comes your way. And I think I have been. So as far as a portfolio goes, I wouldn't recommend spending so much time producing the state-of-the-art website, because again, a lot of your big break might be just as lucky as mine was, right? What I would focus on is anything that's going to make your resume look more impressive, right? And you can list those projects and you can list what they did. And so when I think about what makes an impressive project, right, I think, are they using frameworks that are pertinent to the business, right? Like React is really popular, right? A React project might get you a few more views than like a Vue project. So, I would be thinking I should build some projects using a good framework. And then I think, what can I do to take this to the next level? What's going to help me stand out from other junior candidates? Because you think, well, a lot of people have built a website. Have any of those candidates hosted that website? Is it online, ready to be viewed? And if you host it, did you host it using AWS? And can you write in your resume the services you used? Now that stands out to me. A lot of candidates have made an Android app, right? They might've made one during college. Have you published that Android app on the Play Store? Now that's something, right? And did it get any downloads, right? Even if it's only a couple downloads, that's really something, right? Same with websites. Did you monetize it at all? Did you get Google Ads set up? Even if it only made 10 cents, right? That's still more than a lot of other candidates do. So when you talk about building a portfolio, I think just always ask yourself, what can I do that's the extra mile? What can I do that I think most other candidates aren't doing? And you'd be surprised again how there's some low-hanging fruit there. I just mentioned some. Get an app, publish it on the Play Store, right? You make a website, actually host it somewhere, right? It'll cost you $2 a month to host it online with Amazon, right? That's worth it. And so when you're building a portfolio, I recommend pick some projects that you're interested in, build them with current relevant technology, and then figure out what you can do to go to the extra mile. Again, monetize it, host it, get it on the Play Store. I don't know, anything like that, but that'll really help your portfolio stand out.
Perfect. Well, we've got 2 more questions, so we will answer these and then dive back into the rest of the presentation. So does problem solving that is included in the soft skills actually mean deep diving into competitive coding?
So I would say that competitive coding is inherently not a soft skill, which does not mean that it's not great. But it's I think when we talk about problem solving, there's sort of, I guess all problem solving is a hard skill, right? There's problem solving and like you're given a LeetCode code style question and you can figure out the answer and things like that. But there's also problem solving in the sense of, okay, let's say we have we've set up a DynamoDB table for our app, right? And it's working just fine, but we realize all of a sudden that it's costing us $500 a month to run this DynamoDB table. And it's, and our budget is $200 a month for this DynamoDB table. That's a problem, right? And that's not necessarily like invert a binary tree style problem, but it is problem solving that needs to happen, right? And so that's a story I would be interested in, right? Is when given those constraints, how do you adapt? How do you adjust, right? So problem solving isn't inherently coding. It can also be systems design. It can also be things some teams work with distributed workforces. They've kind of got a person on each time zone. That can be a problem, right? How did you solve that? How do you effectively collaborate that way? So that's a measure of problem solving. But by all means, get into competitive coding. That looks great on a resume. If you even just participated in a hackathon, right? That shows me, hey, this candidate is putting themselves out there, trying to do new things, right? I would be interested in that. I wish I had done more hackathons. I had my first son when I was 22 and in college, so I didn't do any hackathons. But if you're not in that position, then please go out and do as many hackathons as you can.
Great, perfect. Okay, and then our last question for now, and we will continue Q&A at the end. So definitely keep thinking of different questions that you want to ask of Carter. But what advice do you have for finding mentors in the field?
Oh, that's a good question. Your best mentor is going to be a coworker. I would really, when you get your first job, pay attention. Who do you admire? Who looks up to you, right? I still exchange emails with my very first director at Disney every now and again, just because he's someone I really, really admire and really want to be like one day. So your best mentors are always going to be those you're closest to. So that's going to be coworkers, teachers, other students, bosses, anyone you're closest to, right? I have some people who reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm an up and coming person in this field. I was wondering if you could personally mentor me. And I always admire the moxie. I always admire it. That's going to take you far. And I usually tell them that. And then I usually also tell them that I am a very, very busy man and that I don't have time to mentor complete strangers. So you can try that. It works sometimes, but it doesn't always work. So, other places that are a great way to find mentors, like it's underrated, but like Reddit, Twitter, right? Like if you see some, a commenter on Reddit who is frequently posting things and, tech subs and you find their stuff insightful or interesting, you can message them. On Twitter, I follow some accounts that I find very fascinating. And I've reached out to some of them, not to say, will you mentor me personally, but just to ask them a little more or things like that. And I've formed connections over Twitter, Discord, things like that. I think it'll be easier to find mentors as you sort of gravitate naturally to what interests you, right? Lately, I have been very interested in like augmented reality. I thought the new Apple Vision headset seems really, really neat. I don't know how big it's going to be or things like that, but I do plan on buying it because I don't spend a ton of money on stupidly expensive things, but occasionally I do. And I think I'm going to do it this time because I'm really curious about it. I want to build an app for it. My dream is to be that guy when the first iPhone came out and he made the app where you rattle and it's like makes a can sound, right? Or something like that. And he probably made like 20 grand off it. So I'm going to make the tin can app of the Apple Vision when it comes out. But just as I've been interested in that, I've been sort of diving deeper on Twitter and finding that it's more of a niche community. And I've been able to form some relationships with people there just because, again, it's something I'm personally interested in. And the more niche you get, the more you'll find people who also share that same passion, right? It's kind of like the difference between saying like, I love food. Can someone mentor me on food? And saying, I really love Greek cuisine, right? And I'd like to find more people who are interested in Greek cuisine, right? The more granular you get, the easier it is to make connections. But again, the biggest way to find a good mentor is those who are closest to you: students, teachers, coworkers, and bosses. And again, that's what we talk about: networking. Keep up those relationships.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, I am going to turn it back over to you and the rest of the presentation, and then we will meet back for a Q&A at the end.
Great. All right. Let's move on to point number 6. And while we're doing this, put your comments in, and we will get a jump start on the next Q&A. Great. So this is another one. This trips up some more junior candidates, trips up even senior candidates, right? Which is that job descriptions are wish lists, not mandates. If I had needed to match the job description of every job I've had, I would not have been hired at any of the places, right? Job descriptions are often written not by technical folks. They're usually written by HR folks or recruiters, right? And I love recruiters. I mean, I love any person whose entire job is to get me a job. But usually what they'll do is they'll go to a manager and just say, hey, can you tell me every technology you're working with, right? Or things like that. And then you just get these job things where like, what the heck? Like, I got to know all of this. I promise you, you don't. And the other thing that people are forgetting sometimes is sometimes there are job descriptions where someone has worked there for 10 years. They've learned all of that, right? And then they leave and they say, oh my gosh, we got to replace this guy with 10 years of experience, but it's hard to replace that guy with 10 years of experience. So they just list everything that guy knew, not realizing that when he was hired, of course he didn't know all that stuff. So I don't get psyched out by job descriptions. I always say, if you have half of what they're asking for, maybe even a third, it's worth applying. The only exception there is years of experience, right? Which I always recommend to people that you're probably safe applying to anything that, say, for example, if they want 4 years of experience and you have 2, go ahead, right? That's a little different kind of at the beginning, obviously, but for example, if they want 10 years of experience and you have 8, apply. I mean, come on, it really doesn't matter. So yeah, I just be a little more aggressive than you'd think you would with tackling those different jobs. Let's move on to number 7. Okay, size matters. Company size matters is what I'm talking about, which is that the how big a company you work for really does make a big difference in your career, right? I've worked at Disney, which was a huge, huge company. I worked at Grubhub, a smaller company, about medium size. I had a brief stint where I worked at a startup of like 80 people. I work at Amazon, big, big, big company. I worked for my university, right? Which was, I guess the tech portion of it was pretty darn small. And I found that there is a big difference of experience in these companies. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, right? But just as an example, right? I really like that at the big companies I've worked at, they have paternity leave policies set in place, and they can afford for an employee to take 6 weeks off when a kid is born. As someone who's had a couple kids, that's really important to me, right? I like I like the amount of support at Amazon in particular, right? Since there's so many engineers working there, odds are if you run into a problem that's like Amazon specific, usually another engineer has had that problem. You can search for it on an internal search tool or use Slack or things like that. That's really nice. That doesn't really happen at a startup, right? Sometimes the problem you run into, you're the first person who's ever had that problem. What are some of the benefits of a startup compared to Amazon, though, right? Startup, a lot quicker. You produce code a lot faster. You often have more responsibility, right? At Amazon, I get tied up in paperwork a good amount of the time. That never happened when I was at a startup, right? Some people really, really like that quick and lean environment, right? Some people really like at Amazon. I mean, we move a little slower, but the code I ship gets used by literally hundreds of millions of people, which is insane to think about, right? It's like I was talking about at the beginning, like the code I ship is used by Disney, right? Which is kind of crazy to think about. Even some of the other big tech companies that you might not think of. There's one company in particular who uses so many of our services, but doesn't want to be seen as so dependent on us that we're literally not allowed to refer to them by name at Amazon, right? They have a code name that we have to use. And I won't tell you which one it is, but but that's a really cool position. I was tasked with building a feature that company, a company I guarantee all of you have heard of, specifically requested, which is kind of a crazy position to be in. So that's really, really neat. But things take a lot longer. This one feature I was tasked to build has taken months and months and months and months. Would have taken 2 or 3 weeks at a startup, easy. So you just got to know yourself. And sometimes you won't know until you wind up at one of these companies. But just know that there's a big difference of experience depending on the company you work at. And it's worth finding out which one you like. Let's move on. That's point number 8, which is that pure tech pays more. This is general, but I've found that it holds true. And to do that, you just need to understand the economics behind it a bit, right? I loved working at Disney, right? They paid half of what I wound up making at Grubhub. And part of that is because no one goes to Disney for their excellent software. No one goes to Disney World to experience their excellent apps. They go to ride the rides, right? And to meet the characters and things like that. That's what makes Disney money. All the tech I produce at Disney costs Disney money. We are a cost center. Now, Grubhub, that was the opposite. Grubhub was pure technology, right? The technology facilitated everything, right? And so all of a sudden, as an engineer, you're not an expense for the company. You're a revenue generator, right? Think about Amazon, AWS, that's pure technology, right? And the margins are really, really, really high. And so they can afford to pay lots and lots of money to engineers because not only are their margins really high because tech is a really efficient product, but also the way they make more money is by producing more code. So it's good to hire engineers and it's good to pay them as much as they can because you get more code that way. So that doesn't mean that that holds true across all domains, right? There's obviously some companies that aren't pure tech that pay more than some companies that are pure tech. But in general, if you're looking to maximize total compensation, I would target tech companies. But I also want to emphasize maximizing total compensation is not always the best move, right? I'm at a position right now where I make a good amount of money and I'm happy with it. I'm also more stressed than I've been in the past, right? Sometimes I look at people who have much easier jobs than I do and they don't think about work at all, right? And they just kind of go about their life. And I think maybe they're smarter, right? And so there's nothing wrong with saying, I know I could make money playing for the big guys, right? But you never know, right? Sometimes it's better just to work for somewhere where maybe you feel a little more fulfilled, maybe a little less money, right? But you have a little more time. It's all about trade-offs. And I've always said this is a field that rewards people who can make trade-offs. There's no perfect answer. You just got to find out the right answer for you or the problem you're facing. Let's move on. That's number 9. There's a lot of opportunity out there, right? I remember when I first started out, I felt I wanted to work at Disney. It was the only place I wanted to work. And I was fortunate to get a job there. But when I was working at Disney, I'm like, I'll work at Disney the rest of my life, right? Like, this is just the best place in the world. And I didn't realize just how many cool places there are to work out there. And again, just when I'm talking cool, like my standard of reference here, right, is that I worked at a place where I rode roller coasters at lunch, right? And where I was making technology that powered the Disney theme parks, which are parks I've loved ever since I was a kid. And so I just thought there's nowhere that could ever be as cool as this, right? And I haven't found anywhere that'll let me ride roller coasters on lunch, but I have found really interesting technical challenges at Grubhub with really cool people. And Amazon has been really fascinating too. And those are just only 2 companies I've worked at. There's lots and lots of different companies I'd love to work for one day. Companies I'm confident that a company I'll work for one day is a company I don't even know exists right now. And so I would just, if you get so focused on getting that one job, the dream job, it's not the only thing out there. And you would be surprised at just how many cool opportunities there are out there, especially for people who are willing to work hard and, willing to put in the hours to reap those rewards. Let's move on to the last point, number 10. And that plays into a bit of this. Career setbacks are not the end of the world. I know it seems like they are. I promise you. I've had points in my career where I thought the world was collapsing, right? Where I just thought there was no way that I would ever possibly recover from this, right? And guess what? I'm doing fine, right? And career setbacks, a lot of them aren't your fault. Some of them are, right? But you live and you learn and you promise to do better and move on, right? But, there are things... as someone who lives in Utah, where there's a lot of the big tech guys are doing return to office. I don't know what that means for me in the future. I'm fortunate that at Amazon, I have a fully remote role. I haven't had to return to any office. But for a while, it looked like maybe I was going to be able to work at these big guys fully remote. I don't know if that's going to happen anymore. And I have very little interest in moving to San Francisco and Seattle, right? But what I do know is that if that doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world because there are a lot of cool things out there, right? And, I just really believe that, the future belongs to the resilient, people who are willing to get back up after they've been knocked down. And so, if you have a career setback, if you don't get that job you want, if you get your first job, but you get fired from it, if your company goes under, if you get laid off, things like that, that's tough. I'm not downplaying how tough it is. I've been there. And I know how tough that is. But it's not the end of the world and you'll be fine. Just keep moving on, keep moving forward. And I promise you that the things are going to work out for you in the end. And I think, is there another slide? Let's move on. That might be the end of it.
That looks like that's the end of it.
Great.
But happy to allow you to leave any maybe closing comments or thoughts, and then move into that Q&A.
Great. Well, just for everyone, thanks for joining us today. And like I said, we'll do a bit of Q&A. But I want to congratulate you if you're starting. I guess all of you are starting a journey in some way, looking to either begin your career or accelerate it. But just congratulations on being in that part of life. That's an exciting part of life, right? And it's not easy, and it can be scary. But there are only so many times in our life where we really kind of get to make a big play and try to become something bigger, better, more complete than ourselves. And that's a cool position to be in. Something my mom always told me is just to never wish away where you are right now. That's the people who are always the most miserable, is the ones who are always living, hoping that the next thing happens, right? I'm not saying don't have plans and goals. I have lots of plans and goals, right? But always try your hardest to be grateful for where you are right now. And I know that's tough when you're trying to start a career and you got your first job. But you'll look back on these days and you'll remember them fondly. And I encourage you to keep your chin up, to be resilient, to be optimistic, because you really do have a very bright future ahead of you. And if that's hard to see at this particular moment, I know that feeling. I've been there, but I promise you, it's going to work out okay. And you're doing exactly the right thing, seeking out career advice, asking how you can be better, making good goals and plans, right? If you're here, you're already in a good place.
Perfect. I feel so inspired. I don't know about you all, but that was amazing and I loved it. So thank you so, so much. We've got a couple questions that are kind of geared towards the same topic, and a bit about what you just provided us with just so much inspiration and how to really kind of kick off this career with where we're at right now. And so two viewers have asked about moving into this place where you're applying to positions and trying to get this experience when you have little to no experience, whether that is as a fresher or maybe you're looking for a career change and you've done a boot camp. So what advice do you have when it comes to applying for positions when maybe you lack that experience 2+ years?
Absolutely. That's a good question, right? So, I mean, the best experience is experience, right? And I know people always say, I got to have a job to get a job. It's ridiculous, right? And I agree. It is a little crazy, but I would look for any experience you can get, right? Again, that can be projects, right? That can look good on a resume. If you have a buddy who has a ridiculously doomed to fail startup, he wants to make Tinder for cats or something like that, might be worth signing on and building Tinder for cats, right? If at the very beginning you're really struggling to get something, and that can just be experience that can go on your resume, right? As far as other experience, I mean, signing up with a career accelerator like High Counselor, right? That's going to be someone that's really going to help you tailor and boost your resume. But aside from kind of those answers of programming wherever you can get it, right? I mean, and honestly, like I say this, like I always wonder as a kid, like I was always looking for money, and I wonder, I had a lawnmower. I wonder why I just never and a truck even, why I never just like drove up to like a house with like a truck, or like with a lawn that needed to be mowed, and didn't just say like, hey, can I come mow your lawn, right? Like I probably wouldn't have worked all the time, but I might have gotten a couple bucks out of it, right? And so I would encourage you to be involved with your community, right? And think about, is there anyone in your community that could benefit from maybe having an updated website or something like that, right? Is there a restaurant you visit, a local restaurant whose website sucks? I know plenty of great restaurants that have terrible websites, right? Is there your church, or your school's PTA or anything like that, a club you are in at school or something like that, right? So as far as getting experience, I always prefer to be paid for my work, but if you literally have no experience and are trying to get any, I would start thinking, who are people I can help? Who might need some code written for them and maybe can't afford to pay someone to do it? And if it's not going to take too much of my time, 10, 20 hours or so, maybe I could do that for them, right? And then put that on my resume. And that's not only going to show that you have coding experience, but it's also going to show that you're proactive. So I think that could that's something that could benefit you. The other thing that you need to realize when you're starting out, a lot of it is just a numbers game, right? Again, you might have sat through this presentation and said, oh, Carter, look at him. anointed by God himself to be successful and to work at all these cool places. That's not what happened at all, right? Like I said, I applied to 50 internships at Disney, and got turned down to 49 of them, and was the second choice for the one I got. And just by luck, I got it. My very first programming job was because someone didn't think I'd be good at QA, but thought I might be an okay engineer, right? And I'll point out with those things, right? For example, I got recommended to the programming department, right? But as soon as I knew I was recommended to the programming department, I spent probably 10 or 15 hours making a 20 questions sort of game where you kind of like that game where you think of a character from a movie and then it asks you questions until it narrows it down. I made that, but I made it for the kids in my high school marching band, right? And so when I went to that interview, not only did I solve the coding question because I'd been doing well in my classes, but I also said, hey, can I show you this thing I built? And I showed it to them. They're super impressed by that. So when I say that things are luck, I'm not saying that it means that people who are where they are just there because they're luckier than you. It just means that, success is a combination of good fortune and preparation, right? And I've been fortunate to have some strokes of good fortune, but I've also been, I think, diligent enough that when those strokes of good fortune have come, I've been prepared. And so, so you've probably done a lot of work preparing right now, right? So that's always what I think. If success is a combination of good fortune and preparation, just think, do I need to be doing more work preparing, right? Am I getting interviews but not getting the job? Well, you're probably not. You're already getting the good fortune. You're getting the interviews, but you're not passing them. And so maybe that's a lack of preparation. Are you getting no interviews, right? That could be a resume problem. That's also preparation, right? But maybe your resume is great, but you only sent it out to 10 people. Well, of course you're not getting a job if you only send it out to 10 people. So then I start thinking, maybe I increase my luck somehow. And how do I increase my luck? Well, it's a numbers game. Maybe I just send out more of my resumes, right? So I would, that's what I would recommend. I did think, am I not prepared enough or am I not lucky enough? And depending on which one of those it is, how can I make myself more prepared or more lucky? And again, the way you make yourself more lucky is you just increase the odds, or, you increase the number, which will, probability. You guys know what I'm talking about.
Great. Perfect. Someone said that you should be a life coach, Carter, and I don't disagree.
Come to High Council. You can get this advice. I do live sessions with our students, and that's more of like a 1 on 5, 1 on 10 sort of thing. So
yep. All right, so we've got 2 more, and might need your help with just clarifying this one. So what if I give you a scenario where you need to learn everything from scratch and get back to Amazon? What would be the potential roadmap that you would be doing so?
If I started over from scratch, I do not know if I'd be dead set on working at Amazon, which is not to say that I don't enjoy working at Amazon, but it's just to say, again, that there are so many cool places you can work. Amazon is just one of them, right? And so if you're asking this question as more of a like, hey, how would you get to work at a big company from the beginning? I think that's a great question. If you're saying, I will not be a complete individual on time employed at Amazon, I really highly encourage you to get that out of your mind, right? Because you are not in control of whether or not you work at Amazon one day. There's a lot of factors that influence that, right? Sometimes the economic climate, right? Now we're not hiring as much. When I was hired, we were hiring a lot, right? That doesn't mean I'm better or smarter than you necessarily. It just means some things are out of our control. But if you're asking, okay, well, if you had to go from scratch to eventually one day being qualified to work for a big tech company, that's a great question. And I would just think about the stuff I shared in the presentation. I think I would try harder to be more curious about what I was learning and what I was doing at any given job. I think, especially early in my career, I was a little more like, let me just do the minimum to kind of close out this task, and maybe I'll get to go home early and things like that. I think I just would have been more curious about how things worked, tried to learn more. As much as I'd love to give a roadmap, really my roadmap would be get a job, get any job anywhere, right? Whoever will hire you. And when you get there, be curious and dedicated and smart. And don't just learn enough to get by. Learn as much as you possibly can. Because again, that's not going to just benefit your employer. That's going to benefit you. Because then when you go to work at Amazon, right? I remember, it's not on my list of experience, but I did work for a startup at one point. Very brief time. It's a very bad experience, right? But I was surprised when I was interviewing at Amazon, how many stories in that very brief experience I had with that startup came from that startup? How many of my problem solving stories came from there, right? Because the place demanded a lot from me. And so I'm not saying go work in an awful place that demands a lot of you. But what I am saying is you should demand a lot of yourself, and you should push yourself to learn more and to grow more. That's going to give you more knowledge, more opportunities to showcase your problem solving abilities. And then when you do get the good fortune of interviewing at Amazon one day, you'll be prepared. And that's the best combination you can have.
Great, thank you. And then our final question, in the short career of programming, this viewer has seen many codes that seem hackish just to make a product work. So how, in your experience, do you balance getting the code to work and doing it technically correct?
Well, that's a great question, right? I said earlier in here that really engineering is a career that values trade-offs, right? Which is just people who can evaluate the values of and the constraints of any given project, and then make a decision based off that, right? And sometimes there is a trade-off between beautiful code and code that you ship just because it works. I will push back a little and say that there is sometimes people think that there's a direct trade-off between fast code and good code. I believe you can write good code quickly. And so that's something I would be working on. It's just the code that you're producing every day. Are you following good patterns, right? For example, just one little pattern, right, is if you're doing ifs, if you have the potential of returning multiple, you're returning early, basically, like, not instead of having a bunch of nested if else, right? Often you can keep them all on the same line by having some early returns, right? That does not take any longer to write than a big nested if else monster, right? But it's cleaner, and so there's not a trade-off there. The other thing, or for example, keeping your code written in well-defined functions, right? That's not any harder to write than big jumbled spaghetti code, right? It's just a matter of doing it right the first time, right? As you're coding, you say, wait a minute, this would look better as a function. It takes 2 seconds to put that into its own function and to call that later on, right? And so that's not a trade-off between time and speed, or between time and or speed and quality. So that's the first thing, is I would try to identify patterns where you can write good code just as quickly as you can write bad code. And then the other thing is, there is value in shipping a product, and there's value. That's one thing we believe in Amazon. One of our leadership principles is bias for action, which is that speed matters in business. And sometimes to ship a product, you have to write code that's not as good as it could be. I can't give you the answer for all of that everywhere. But I think just when we talk about trade-offs, when you ship poor code, if you're not familiar with the term, we call that technical debt, right? Because basically what you're doing with tech debt when you ship poor code is you're basically borrowing from yourself, right? Where you're saying, we're going to borrow time from the future now, which is, we're going to save on time now, but this tech debt is going to become a problem in the future. And we need to know, are we okay with making that decision? It's just like, it's just like borrowing money in real life, right? Sometimes it makes a lot of sense to borrow maybe a lot of money at the time. Maybe you're starting a business and you really think it's going to take off, but you just need 50 grand to get it started, right? That might make a lot of sense, right? Because that that's going to yield more money for you. You're going to be able to pay it off pretty easily, right? Now, if you are broke and don't have a job and you say, I'm going to borrow 50 grand to go on the best vacation I've ever had, it's a really bad idea, right? And so I think with tech debt, if you are using it that way, you're saying this is going to give us time now because we really need the time now, but we're going to budget time in the future to fix it. That's a fine trade-off. The problem is with people who accumulate tech debt is they never plan on paying it off in the future. And just like real debt, the interest becomes too much one day and eventually it will crush you. So again, I can't give you the right answer for every scenario, but that's the general principle I operate by.
Perfect. Thank you, Carter. That was amazing. Just want to thank you again for all of your insight and life coaching over the last hour. so thank you so much. That was really amazing. And some of the things that Carter talked about in those 10 tips are things that are available through High Counselor, right? So if you are interested in learning more about High Counselor and how we can help, make sure that you join that info session that is being held tomorrow night. I'm going to drop a few links in the chat. So we definitely want your feedback. Give us the good, the bad, and the ugly. So feel free to use the link in the chat to provide us with some feedback and also any sessions that you may want to see in the future. And then if you're interested in signing up for the info session for tomorrow, feel free to click the link in the comment box. Again, happy to answer any questions that you might have about applying to the cohort at that time. I'm going to share the application with you. So if you are interested in going ahead and getting that application in, I will drop the link for that. We talked about those live projects and ways to enhance your resume and get some experience. Carter talked about this as well. So if you're interested in, beefing up your resume and getting some of that experience and getting to be a part of something bigger, we've got those live projects and would love for you to be a part of that. So I'm going to drop the link there. And then finally, we are hosting a virtual job fair. So definitely encourage you to look at that, sign up for that job fair. It is tomorrow. So if you've got availability to join us for that job fair, check out the information on our LinkedIn. And then finally, just want to encourage you to stay connected with High Counselor. You can follow us on Instagram at High Counselor 2022 or on LinkedIn. A great way to stay engaged with our awesome content and know what we've got coming up. So, Carter, one last opportunity for anything that you want to leave people with as we depart today.
No, good luck. I think if you're interested in what you've heard today, please give High Counselor a look. I'm just one of the many instructors here, all of whom are excellent. And if you join High Counselor, you can have the opportunity to have your resume reviewed by a professional software engineer like me. To get, we even offer mock interview experience, practices with professional software engineers. It's a really positive experience. I've really enjoyed my time with High Counselor, and so I would just encourage you, if you found today interesting, that's the way to get more of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.
All right. See you guys later.